Alberto Corda's 1960 photograph of Ernesto Che Guevara is one of the most reproduced pictures in human history. Found on T-shirts, posters, and murals worldwide, this single image has become a global shorthand for defiance and rebellion. In 1951, Ernesto Guevara was a 23-year-old medical student in Buenos Aires. He came from a progressive middle-class family and spent his time playing rugby, writing poetry, and battling chronic asthma, a life far removed from the militant icon he would become. That December, he and his friend Alberto Granado set off on a 9-month journey across Latin America. They traveled on a rickety Norton 500 motorcycle, nicknamed La Poderosa Segunda, or the Mighty One, aiming to see the continent for themselves. Traveling through Chile, Peru, and Colombia, Guevara encountered a world of stark deprivation. He spoke with exploited copper miners in the Atacama Desert, met impoverished indigenous families living in the ruins of Machu Picchu, and volunteered in isolated Amazonian leper colonies. These encounters led him to a radical diagnosis. He began to view Latin America not as separate nations, but as a single entity, chained by poverty and foreign economic influence. He concluded that imperialism was a continent-wide disease that medicine alone could never cure. In 1954, Guevara was in Guatemala when a CIA-backed military coup overthrew the democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz. Watching the government collapse reinforced his belief that the United States would never allow peaceful socialist reform in the region. He fled to Mexico City, where he was introduced to a group of exiled Cuban revolutionaries, including Fidel and Raúl Castro. They were planning an expedition to overthrow the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista, and Guevara immediately committed to the cause. He joined the 26th of July movement as its physician, though his training in the mountains of Mexico focused more on marksmanship and guerrilla tactics than surgery. It was during this time that his comrades gave him the nickname Che, an Argentine interjection for pal. On November 25, 1956, 82 men sailed from Mexico aboard the yacht Granma. The landing in Cuba was a catastrophe. Batista's forces ambushed the rebels almost immediately, killing most of the group and forcing the few survivors to flee into the Sierra Maestra mountains. During the chaotic retreat, Guevara reached a defining crossroads. He left his medical satchel in the mud to hoist a heavy crate of ammunition, prioritizing the fight over his training as a healer. He was now a soldier first. Deep in the Sierra Maestra, Guevara enforced a rigorous military structure. He organized supply lines, established field hospitals, and conducted daily political education classes for his growing column of recruits to prepare them for a long war of attrition. He earned a promotion to comandante, the highest rank in the rebel army. He was a strict disciplinarian who led from the front, but he also documented the executions of suspected traitors and deserters in his diaries, viewing revolutionary violence as a necessary tool. The war reached its turning point in December 1958 at the Battle of Santa Clara. Guevara led his men to derail an armored train carrying troops and supplies, a logistical victory destroying the regime's ability to defend the West. With the military in collapse, Fulgencio Batista fled the island on New Year's Day. Guevara and his column entered Havana on January 2, 1959, marking the end of the dictatorship and the beginning of a new order. In just 3 years, a small band of fighters had dismantled a national army. For Guevara, this success validated his worldview that a committed group of guerrillas could change the course of history through uncompromising armed struggle. After the victory, Guevara transitioned from guerrilla to state official. At the La Cabaña fortress, he oversaw revolutionary tribunals that led to the execution of hundreds of Batista officials and alleged war criminals, actions that would remain a central part of his controversial legacy. He took on immense economic responsibility, serving as president of the National Bank and later as Minister of Industries. He drove the nationalization of foreign-owned companies and signed the country's currency simply as Che, signaling his disdain for the mechanics of capitalism. He advocated for the creation of the new man, a socialist citizen who would work for moral satisfaction rather than material gain. To set an example, he frequently spent his weekends performing voluntary manual labor in sugar fields and at construction sites. Guevara also led high-profile diplomatic missions, traveling the world to denounce U.S. imperialism and build ties with the Soviet Union and China. He argued that the Cuban Revolution was just the first step in a global struggle for liberation. While he held absolute power, his rigid idealism clashed with the reality of running a state. He grew increasingly frustrated with Soviet-style bureaucracy and the slow pace of industrialization, finding himself unsuited for the compromises of peacetime governance. In 1965, Guevara vanished from public life. He left behind a farewell letter to Fidel Castro, renouncing his government positions and his Cuban citizenship. He believed his duty lay in exporting the revolution to other nations facing oppression. This strategy centered on a small vanguard group, represented here by a single pulsing nucleus. Guevara believed that by establishing a foco in a remote area, a small band of guerrillas could spark a chain reaction, eventually drawing the rural population into a general uprising. He first attempted to apply this theory in the Congo, supporting local rebels against the central government. It was a failure. Guevara struggled with language barriers, tribal divisions, and a lack of coordination, eventually describing the effort in his diary as a disaster. After returning secretly to Cuba to recuperate, he set his sights on Bolivia. He hoped to create a guerrilla training ground that would eventually spark a continental revolution across South America. But the foco theory relied on a critical assumption that the conditions of the Cuban Revolution could be replicated anywhere. He arrived in Bolivia without the support of the local Communist Party or the trust of the peasants he intended to lead. The Bolivian campaign quickly unraveled. Guevara and his small force were plagued by harsh terrain, worsening health, and betrayal by local informants. Isolated and lacking any domestic support, they were slowly, methodically hunted through the rugged canyons of the southeast. His group was eventually encircled by the Bolivian army. This force was far more capable than the rebels expected, having been trained in counterinsurgency tactics by CIA advisors specifically sent to track and eliminate Guevara. On October 8, 1967, Guevara was wounded and captured during a firefight near the village of La Higuera. The following day, on the direct orders of the Bolivian president, he was taken to a small schoolhouse to be executed. Facing the soldiers sent to kill him, Guevara remained defiant. His reported final words were a challenge to his executioner. "Shoot, coward, you are only going to kill a man." His military campaign failed, leaving him dead at 39. Yet his willingness to abandon absolute power for a global struggle cemented his lasting status as an icon. Decades later, Guevara remains a symbol of the enduring and often violent appeal of revolutionary idealism.